Welcome back, movie lovers, to Review and Facts, the channel where we break down your favorite films in complete detail, and today we are diving into a spooky, kooky, and thoroughly entertaining animated adventure, The Addams Family 2. If you love supernatural comedy wrapped in family charm, then this is exactly the movie for you, so sit back, relax, and let us take you through everything you need to know about this film, from where it comes from, who made it, what it is about, who voices these unforgettable characters, and when you can watch it. The Addams Family 2 is a computer-animated supernatural black comedy film that was produced in the United States and Canada. It was released in the year 2021 and stands as the sequel to the very successful 2019 animated film The Addams Family, which introduced modern audiences to a fresh take on the legendary macabre family created decades earlier by the American cartoonist Charles Addams. The original comic strip characters, born from the imagination of Charles Addams, have been reinterpreted many times over the years across television, live-action films, and now this modern computer-animated franchise. The Addams Family 2 was directed by Greg Tiernan and Conrad Vernon, who also directed the first installment, ensuring a consistent creative vision across both films. The movie was written by Dan Hernandez, Benji Summit, Ben Queen, and Susanna Fogel, with the original story crafted by Hernandez and Summit. Production companies behind the film include Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Pictures, Braun Creative, and Cinesite Studios, and the film was distributed in the United States by United Artists Releasing, while international audiences received the film through Universal Pictures. This is very much an American and Canadian production that carries forward the gothic charm and dark humor that fans have loved from the Addams Family universe for generations. Now let us talk about what this movie is actually about, because The Addams Family 2 takes the household we fell in love with in the first film and sends them out into the wide world on a chaotic road trip. The story begins at a middle school science fair, where Wednesday Addams is preparing to present a rather unusual experiment of her own creation. She has managed to transfer certain characteristics from her pet octopus, whom she has named Socrates, onto her Uncle Fester, essentially proving that traits from one living creature can be transplanted into another. It is a brilliant and unsettling piece of science, entirely fitting for a girl raised in the Addams household. But Wednesday is disappointed when the school decides to award everyone a participation trophy instead of recognizing her clearly superior work. However, her invention does catch the attention of someone rather important, a scientist by the name of Cyrus Strange, who appears before her through a holographic projection and tells her that her work is nothing short of brilliant. He seems eager to bring her into his world of scientific discovery, though Wednesday is initially hesitant and does not take his offer seriously. Back home, tension begins to build within the Addams household. Gomez notices that his children, Wednesday and Pugsley, seem to be growing apart from him and Morticia, pulling away as children often do when they get older and begin to seek their own identities. Determined not to let his family drift apart, Gomez comes up with the idea of a cross-country road trip, a chance for the entire family to reconnect and spend quality time together before the children grow up entirely. He brings out an enormous and unsettling-looking camper vehicle, and along with Morticia, Wednesday, Pugsley, Uncle Fester, Lurch, and the ever-mischievous disembodied hand known as Thing, the family sets off on their journey across America, leaving Grandmama behind to look after the mansion, where she wastes no time turning the empty house into her own personal party venue. Before they can properly begin their trip, however, a strange and persistent lawyer named Mr. Mastila approaches Gomez and Morticia with a shocking claim, insisting that Wednesday was switched at birth and may not actually be their biological daughter. The parents dismiss this outright and continue on with their vacation plans, but this claim sets the stage for the chaos that follows throughout the rest of the film. As the family embarks on their journey, stopping at iconic American landmarks, they find themselves quietly pursued by Mastila and his brutish henchman named Pongo, both of whom are working for the mysterious Cyrus Strange, who has plans of his own concerning Wednesday. The road trip takes the Addams family through a series of wild and memorable stops, including a chaotic visit to the Alamo, an eventful stop in San Antonio, and eventually the Grand Canyon, where things take a turn that changes the course of the story. At the Grand Canyon, cousin ITT, who briefly joined the family for part of the journey, departs from the group, while Morticia gives Wednesday a special necklace containing a small vial of the family's blood, a sentimental object that becomes far more important later in the story. Meanwhile, Pugsley accidentally causes an explosion at the canyon while trying to impress some fellow travelers, drawing unwanted attention to the family once again. During this chaos, Uncle Fester begins to show strange physical changes, a lingering side effect from Wednesday's earlier science experiment, and he slowly starts transforming into something far less human. While the rest of the family deals with these distractions, Wednesday wanders off on her own, and it is during this moment that Morticia attempts once again to capture her. This time, Wednesday manages to outsmart him, trapping him herself and demanding answers. Through his phone, she discovers that he has been working directly for Cyrus Strange, who claims to be her true biological father and invites her to come live with him in Sausalito, California, where he promises she can fully explore and expand her scientific talents in ways her own family supposedly could not support. Confused and curious, Wednesday runs a DNA test using a strand of Gomez's hair, and the results appear to confirm that she is not related to him at all, throwing the family into emotional turmoil and pushing Wednesday further toward the possibility that she truly belongs somewhere else. Believing that her true identity may lie elsewhere, Wednesday eventually makes her way towards Cyrus Strange, while the rest of the Addams family, especially Gomez, become desperate to reach her and prove that family is defined by far more than biology alone. Cyrus Strange is revealed to be an eccentric and dangerously ambitious scientist, and it becomes increasingly clear that his intentions toward Wednesday are far from what he initially presented. As the Addams family rushes to save her, they find themselves in a confrontation inside Cyrus Strange's strikingly modern laboratory, an environment that visually contrasts sharply with the dark Gothic aesthetic of their own mansion. During the ensuing chaos, Cyrus accidentally comes into contact with his own experimental formula, transforming him into a massive hybrid monster. In a desperate bid to protect the family, Uncle Fester, whose earlier transformation now fully takes hold, emerges as a giant squid-like creature to battle Cyrus directly. The two monstrous figures clash violently until they both tumble out of the building, with Cyrus ultimately falling to his death, while an exhausted and weakened Fester manages to hold on. It is at this moment that Wednesday uses the very necklace Morticia gave her earlier, using the family blood within it to restore Fester back to his normal self and save his life. Having witnessed everything unfold, Wednesday comes to fully understand and embrace exactly where she belongs, realizing that being an Addams is not about biology or DNA tests but about the love, loyalty, and unconditional acceptance her family has always given her. The film closes on a warm and heartfelt note as the family returns home together, closer than ever before, with even a new character named Ophelia, revealed to be connected to Cyrus, finding a place among them as she transitions into a more ordinary human life. Gomez also reveals a small and amusing secret of his own regarding his hair, playfully explaining the strange results of Wednesday's earlier DNA test, and the film ends with Gomez promising his family an even bigger adventure the next time around, hinting playfully at future journeys beyond just American soil. Now let us move on to the voice cast that brought this wonderfully strange family to life once again. Oscar Isaac returns to voice Gomez Addams, bringing his same charismatic, passionate, and endlessly loving energy to the patriarch of the family. Charlize Theron reprises her role as Morticia Addams, delivering the same calm, elegant, and quietly commanding presence that defines the matriarch of the household. Chloe Grace Moretz continues to voice Wednesday Addams, capturing her deadpan wit and gradually evolving emotional journey throughout the film. Nick Kroll returns as Uncle Fester, bringing his signature comedic charm along with a surprisingly touching arc this time around. Javon Walton takes over the role of Pugsley Addams, stepping into a part previously voiced by another actor in the first film. Bette Midler returns once more as Grandmama, injecting her usual boisterous energy into every scene she appears in. Snoop Dogg reprises his role as the voice of Cousin Itt, adding his unmistakable style to the character. Bill Hader joins the cast as the mysterious and ultimately villainous Cyrus Strange, while Wallace Shawn plays the persistent and somewhat comedic lawyer Mr. Mustila. Together, this ensemble cast brings an incredible amount of personality, humor, and heart to every single scene throughout the film. As for the release details, The Addams Family 2 was released theatrically in the United States on the 1st of October in the year 2021, distributed by United Artists Releasing, while international audiences saw the film released shortly afterward through Universal Pictures. Interestingly, due to the ongoing effects of the global pandemic at the time, the film was also made available for online rental on the very same day in both the United States and Canada, giving audiences the flexibility to enjoy the movie either in theaters or from the comfort of their own homes. The film runs for approximately 93 minutes and carries a family-friendly PG rating, making it accessible for viewers of nearly all ages while still retaining that signature Addams Family blend of dark humor and gothic charm. In terms of marketing before release, the film was supported by trailers and promotional clips that highlighted its road trip premise, showcasing the family's chaotic and comedic adventures across iconic American landmarks, along with glimpses of Cousin Itt's memorable moments and the strange new character of Cyrus Strange. These trailers successfully captured the tone of the film, blending humor, family bonding, and just enough mystery to intrigue audiences without giving away the major twists involving Wednesday's true identity. Overall, The Addams Family 2 continues the tradition of taking a beloved, eerie, and endlessly quirky family and placing them into new and unexpected situations, all while reinforcing the timeless message that family is built on love and loyalty rather than blood alone. Whether you are a long-time fan of the Addams Family franchise or someone simply looking for a fun, spooky, and heartfelt animated adventure, this film offers something enjoyable for the entire family to watch together. The family we return to. Before we even reach the opening scene of The Addams Family 2, it is worth pausing to remember exactly who this family is and why audiences fell for them so quickly in the first film. The Addams household is built on a wonderfully simple inversion of everything a typical family sitcom represents. Where most families are frightened by storms, spiders, and the supernatural, the Addams family finds comfort in exactly those things. Where most parents worry about their children being too weird or too dark, Gomez and Morticia worry when their children are not weird or dark enough. This inversion is the engine that drives almost every joke and every emotional beat in both films, and it is why the family has remained culturally beloved since Charles Addams first sketched them decades ago for a very different audience in a very different era. By the time we reach the sequel, the family has already settled into their sprawling, crooked mansion on the hill, following the events of the first movie where they successfully defended their home and their community from outside prejudice. That earlier story was fundamentally about acceptance, about a family learning that they did not need to change who they were in order to be loved by their neighbors. This sequel takes a different emotional angle. Instead of looking outward at how the world sees the Addams family, it turns the camera inward, asking what happens inside a family once the external threat is gone and the real challenge becomes simply staying close to one another as the children grow older. That shift in focus is subtle, but it shapes everything that follows. The science fair. Our story properly begins at Wednesday's school, where a science fair is underway. Wednesday, ever the prodigy of the macabre, has spent considerable time developing an experiment that feels entirely true to her character. She has been working with her pet octopus, a creature she has affectionately named Socrates, and has devised a method for transferring certain traits from one living being to another. As a demonstration of her theory, she applies her technique to her own Uncle Fester, hoping to show the judges and her classmates that intelligence, ability, and other traits can, in theory, be shared between two very different creatures. It is a wonderfully dark little joke that Wednesday, a child raised by a family who considers grave robbing and torture chambers to be casual hobbies, would treat something as ethically complicated as cross-species trait transfer like a normal school project. And that is really the comedic backbone of both films. The Addams Family never sees themselves as unusual. Everything they do is treated with total sincerity and confidence, which is exactly why it lands as funny to everyone watching from the outside. Wednesday's confidence in her project is not misplaced either. Her experiment technically works. Fester briefly displays heightened intelligence and capability as a direct result of her science. But instead of being recognized for genuinely groundbreaking work, Wednesday watches in quiet fury as the school decides to reward every student equally, handing out identical participation trophies regardless of actual achievement. For a character like Wednesday, who values precision, honesty, and merit above almost everything else, this moment cuts deep. It is a small scene, but it does a lot of narrative work, because it plants the very first seed of Wednesday's growing frustration with a world that does not seem to value her the way she values herself. It is in the aftermath of this disappointment that the story introduces its central antagonist, though we do not know it yet. A holographic projection appears before Wednesday, representing a scientist named Cyrus Strange. Unlike the dismissive judges and classmates around her, Cyrus tells Wednesday that her work is remarkable. He praises her intelligence directly and personally in a way that nobody else at the fair has bothered to do. It is a small gesture on his part, but for a girl who has just been quietly humiliated by a trophy meant to comfort rather than reward, those words land with real weight. This is the first domino in a chain of events that will eventually pull Wednesday away from her family and into genuine danger, and it works precisely because it exploits something true and relatable, the universal desire to be seen and validated by someone who appears to understand your talent better than the people closest to you do. Tensions at home. Once the family returns home, the film shifts into quieter, more domestic territory for a while, and this section deserves attention because it is where the emotional core of the movie is really built. Gomez begins to notice that both of his children are pulling away from him. Wednesday is becoming more withdrawn and independent, immersed in her own scientific pursuits, while Pugsley is going through his own version of adolescent awkwardness, fumbling through attempts to impress people around him and clearly craving approval in his own chaotic way. For Gomez, whose entire identity is built around passionate, theatrical, all-consuming love for his family, this quiet drifting is almost unbearable. He is a character who expresses affection loudly and constantly, and the sight of his children pulling inward feels to him like a small heartbreak repeating itself every single day. Morticia, always more composed and measured than her husband, watches Gomez struggle with this and ultimately suggests the idea that becomes the engine of the entire film. If the children are drifting because life has become too comfortable and too separate, then perhaps forcing everyone into close quarters together, away from home, away from distractions, might be exactly what the family needs to reconnect. This is where the road trip concept is born, and it is worth noting how cleverly the film uses a very ordinary, relatable family situation and filters it entirely through the Addams family's exaggerated, gothic sensibility. Nearly every family has experienced some version of this exact tension, parents feeling their children slipping away as they get older, and nearly every family has experienced the awkward, occasionally disastrous solution of the forced family vacation. By grounding the plot in something so universally recognizable, the film manages to stay emotionally accessible even while everything happening on screen involves haunted campers, giant octopus transformations, and holographic scientists. Gomez wastes no time turning this idea into reality. He unveils an enormous, menacing-looking camper vehicle, fully outfitted with all the ominous Addams Family flair you would expect, and begins preparing the household for departure. Grandmama elects to stay behind to look after the mansion, and it does not take long before she has converted the empty house into an impromptu party venue, charging admission to curious guests eager to see the inside of the infamous Addams estate. It is a small subplot, but it adds a nice comedic rhythm running parallel to the main road trip, giving us periodic glimpses back at the chaos Grandmama causes while the rest of the family is away. The first warning sign. Just before the family departs, a strange and persistent man introduces himself at their door. He identifies himself as Mr. Morticia, a lawyer representing an undisclosed client. Morticia claims that Wednesday was switched at birth, suggesting that the girl the Addams family has raised for her entire life might not actually be biologically theirs at all. It is a jarring accusation delivered with unsettling confidence, and Morticia's slippery, overly formal demeanor immediately marks him as someone not to be trusted. Gomez and Morticia, secure in their love for Wednesday regardless of biology, dismiss the claim outright and continue preparing for their trip. This dismissal is important, because it tells us something crucial about how the Addams parents view family. To them, blood relation is almost irrelevant next to loyalty, love, and belonging. This philosophy becomes the thematic backbone the entire film eventually returns to during its climax, but at this early stage, it simply reads as another eccentric interruption in the Addams family's already chaotic life. Morticia, however, does not give up so easily, and his continued pursuit of the family throughout their journey becomes one of the film's steady sources of comic tension. Hitting the road. With the camper packed and the family gathered, the Addams set off, and this is where the film really opens up visually and tonally. Gomez, Morticia, Wednesday, Pugsley, Uncle Fester, the ever-loyal and towering Lurch, and the endlessly expressive disembodied hand known as Thing all pile into their strange vehicle and begin their long trek across the American landscape. It is worth pausing here to appreciate just how much visual personality this stretch of the film carries. The animation team clearly had fun contrasting the ornate, shadowy, Victorian Gothic design of everything Addams related with the bright, open, sun-drenched highways and landmarks of the American road trip. Every time the family camper pulls into a new location, there is a small but satisfying visual joke in watching this rolling monument to darkness and decay park itself among gift shops, diners, and tourist attractions built for cheerful, ordinary vacationers. The first stretch of the journey establishes the rhythm the rest of the road trip will follow. Gomez, ever the eternal optimist about family bonding, treats every mundane stop like a grand adventure, while Morticia maintains her usual calm, dry amusement at the chaos unfolding around her. Pugsley, still smarting from his science fair disaster, spends much of the early trip trying to find ways to prove himself, whether through reckless stunts or attempts to impress strangers they meet along the way. Wednesday, meanwhile, remains distant and preoccupied, her mind clearly still lingering on the strange scientist who complimented her work and the uncomfortable accusation from the lawyer who confronted her family at the door. It is a quiet but effective piece of storytelling, because even as the film delivers big, loud comedic set pieces, it never lets us forget that Wednesday is emotionally unsettled underneath her usual deadpan exterior. Cousin ITT, that unmistakable pile of flowing hair with a voice all its own, joins the family for part of this journey, adding another layer of chaotic energy to the group. ITT has always functioned as something of a wild-card character in the Addams universe, unpredictable and delightfully absurd, and the film uses this stretch of the trip to lean into some fun physical comedy built around ITT's presence, including a memorable musical performance that gives the character a moment to shine before eventually departing from the group later at the Grand Canyon. The Alamo and early chaos. One of the first major stops on the journey brings the family to the Alamo, a location soaked in serious historical weight that the film, true to Addams Family fashion, treats with a mixture of reverence and absurdist humor. True to the family's established comedic formula, what should be a simple historical tourist stop spirals into unexpected chaos, largely fueled by Pugsley's ongoing desire to prove himself capable of something impressive. His attempts to show off in front of onlookers repeatedly backfire in increasingly disastrous ways, drawing embarrassed reactions from strangers and exasperated sighs from his family, all while somehow leaving the Addams family relatively unbothered by the destruction unfolding around them. This section of the film also continues developing the subplot involving Morticia and his hulking henchman Pongo, who are trailing the family at a distance, searching for an opportunity to isolate Wednesday from the rest of the group. Their pursuit adds a low simmering tension underneath the comedic road trip antics, reminding the audience that despite the family's dismissal of Morticia's claims, someone out there is taking this situation very seriously indeed. San Antonio and growing cracks. As the family continues onward, passing through San Antonio, the film uses this stretch to deepen the emotional cracks forming within the household. Gomez, desperate to recreate the closeness he remembers from when his children were younger, keeps orchestrating increasingly elaborate bonding activities, most of which fail to land the way he intends. Wednesday, in particular, grows more withdrawn, responding to her father's efforts with sharp, deadpan remarks that carry genuine emotional distance beneath their comedic delivery. It is during this stretch that Uncle Fester begins to notice subtle changes happening within his own body, faint physical symptoms lingering from Wednesday's earlier science fair experiment. At first these changes are treated as a light-hearted running joke, small strange twitches and unusual cravings that Fester brushes off as nothing serious. But the film plants these details carefully, building toward a much larger transformation that will become critically important during the story's climax. This is a good example of the kind of narrative efficiency the film relies on throughout its runtime, using comedic beats early on to quietly set up dramatic payoffs later, so that when the bigger, stranger moments arrive, they feel earned rather than random. Meanwhile, Wednesday's internal conflict continues to deepen. She finds herself replaying her interaction with Cyrus Strange over and over in her mind, drawn to the idea that somewhere out there exists a person who might understand and appreciate her scientific ambitions in a way her own family, however loving, simply does not. This is an important psychological thread the film handles with more nuance than it might initially appear to have on the surface. Wednesday is not written as ungrateful or cruel toward her family. Rather, she is written as a gifted, restless child experiencing a very common and very real form of adolescent uncertainty, questioning where she truly belongs and whether the people who raised her are capable of fully understanding who she is becoming. The Grand Canyon. The road trip eventually brings the family to the Grand Canyon, and this stop marks one of the most pivotal turning points in the entire story. It is here that Cousin ITT bids farewell to the family, continuing on toward other plans, leaving the household one member lighter as tensions continue to simmer beneath the surface. It is also here that Morticia shares a quiet, tender moment with Wednesday, gifting her daughter a small necklace containing a vial of the family's blood, a sentimental keepsake meant to symbolize the unbreakable bond of family lineage. Neither Morticia nor Wednesday realizes in this moment just how significant this small gift will become before the story's end, but the film plants it here with deliberate care, ensuring the emotional payoff later feels both earned and satisfying. Naturally, given the Addams family's talent for chaos, the peaceful visit to the Grand Canyon does not remain peaceful for long. Pugsley, once again attempting to prove his own worth and impress those around him, accidentally triggers a massive explosion at the canyon, drawing widespread panic and unwanted attention from nearby tourists and park authorities alike. It is a big, loud, visually spectacular sequence, but underneath the comedy, it also reinforces just how much Pugsley has been struggling throughout this entire trip, desperately searching for a way to matter, to be seen as capable, in a family full of larger-than-life personalities. In the aftermath of the explosion, as the family scrambles to manage the fallout, Uncle Fester's condition takes a noticeable turn for the worse. What began as small, quirky symptoms following Wednesday's science experiment now begins manifesting into something far more physically dramatic. Tentacle-like changes begin appearing across his body, a clear and unmistakable sign that Wednesday's earlier experiment did far more than anyone initially realized. Fester, ever loyal and endlessly good-natured despite his own discomfort, tries his best to downplay what is happening to him, insisting he simply needs rest rather than worrying the rest of the family during their vacation. Wednesday alone. It is during this moment of distraction and chaos at the canyon that Wednesday slips away from the group, seeking a rare moment of solitude. This is precisely the opportunity Morticia has been waiting for throughout the entire journey. He approaches Wednesday directly, attempting once again to convince her of his claims regarding her true parentage. However, true to her character, Wednesday refuses to be an easy target. Instead of falling for his manipulation, she manages to outmaneuver him entirely, successfully trapping him and turning the tables on her would-be captor. With Morticia now at her mercy, Wednesday discovers something crucial when his phone begins ringing during their confrontation. The call reveals unmistakably that Morticia has been working directly under the employment of Cyrus Strange, the very scientist who praised her work back at the science fair. This revelation immediately reframes everything Wednesday thought she understood about the strange lawyer who has been pursuing her family throughout their trip. Cyrus himself soon makes contact with Wednesday, presenting himself not as a threat but as someone offering an incredible opportunity, claiming that he is, in fact, her true biological father and inviting her to come live with him in Sausalito, California, where he promises she will finally have the resources and support necessary to fully explore her extraordinary scientific talents. This is a genuinely well-constructed piece of manipulation on the film's part, because everything Cyrus offers Wednesday plays directly into the emotional vulnerability the story has been carefully building throughout the entire road trip. Wednesday has spent this whole journey feeling misunderstood, underappreciated, and increasingly distant from her family. Cyrus positions himself as the solution to all of that, offering validation, purpose, and a place where her intelligence will be celebrated rather than overlooked. Driven by a mixture of curiosity, hurt, and genuine scientific ambition, Wednesday decides to test the claim for herself. She conducts her own DNA analysis using a strand of Gomez's hair, and to her shock, the results appear to confirm that she is not biologically related to him at all. This moment marks the emotional low point of the film, and it lands with more weight than one might initially expect from an animated family comedy. For all its jokes, gags, and monster transformations, the story ultimately hinges on a very human question: whether love and belonging require a biological connection or whether family is something built through loyalty, presence, and genuine care over time. Wednesday, faced with what appears to be undeniable scientific proof, begins seriously considering the possibility that she truly belongs somewhere else entirely, with a father who seems to understand and celebrate the very traits her own family sometimes struggles to fully embrace. The family scrambles. Back at the camper, the rest of the Addams family soon realizes that Wednesday has disappeared, and panic quickly sets in. Gomez, already emotionally raw from watching his children drift further away throughout this entire trip, is devastated by the possibility that his daughter might be seriously considering leaving the family behind. Morticia, despite her usual composed exterior, shares in this fear, and the family quickly abandons their remaining vacation plans in favor of a single, urgent mission: finding Wednesday and bringing her home safely. This section of the film shifts the tone noticeably, moving away from the light-hearted comedic road trip energy of earlier scenes and into something more urgent and emotionally charged. The stakes feel real now, not because of any physical danger yet, but because of the emotional distance threatening to permanently separate this family that, despite all its chaos and eccentricity, clearly loves one another deeply. Lurch, ever the silent, dependable pillar of strength within the household, plays a quietly important role in this stretch of the story, helping coordinate the family's efforts to track down Wednesday's location and reach her before it is too late. Arrival in Sausalito. Eventually, the family's search leads them to Sausalito, California, and specifically to the strikingly modern laboratory belonging to Cyrus Strange. The film uses this location as a deliberate visual contrast to everything we have come to associate with the Addams Family aesthetic. Where their own mansion is dark, ornate, and steeped in Gothic Victorian detail, Cyrus Strange's facility is sleek, minimalist, and drenched in clinical white and glass architecture. This contrast is not just a visual flourish, it functions as a thematic statement as well, representing two fundamentally different philosophies, one built on eccentric, imperfect, deeply personal love, and the other built on cold, calculated ambition disguised as scientific progress. Inside the facility, the family discovers Wednesday, and it becomes increasingly clear that Cyrus Strange's true intentions are far darker than his initial warm and inviting persona suggested. His interest in Wednesday was never rooted in genuine paternal affection at all. Instead, he has been using elaborate deception in pursuit of his own selfish scientific ambitions, seeking to exploit both Wednesday's talent and her DNA for his own gain. As the truth of his manipulation becomes clear, the family moves quickly to protect Wednesday and confront a man who has been secretly orchestrating chaos throughout their entire journey. The climactic transformation. The confrontation inside the laboratory escalates rapidly, and this is where the film delivers its biggest and most visually chaotic sequence. During the ensuing struggle, Cyrus Strange accidentally comes into direct contact with his own experimental formula, the very substance responsible for the strange transformations occurring throughout the story. The exposure instantly and dramatically transforms him into a massive, hybrid monster, wildly powerful and completely unpredictable, immediately turning what had been a tense standoff into a full-blown battle for survival. It is at this critical moment that Uncle Fester's earlier transformation, quietly building throughout the entire road trip since Wednesday's original science experiment, reaches its full and dramatic completion. Fester emerges as an enormous, squid-like creature, and despite his gentle, easygoing nature throughout the rest of the film, he does not hesitate for a single moment to place himself directly between the monstrous Cyrus and the rest of his family. What follows is a wild, chaotic battle between the two transformed figures, filled with the kind of exaggerated physical comedy and genuine tension that this franchise handles so well, blending real stakes with moments of absurd humor even in the middle of a climactic fight. The battle between Fester and Cyrus eventually spills outside the laboratory entirely, the two massive creatures grappling and struggling until both ultimately tumble from a great height. Cyrus Strange, whose deception and manipulation set this entire chain of events into motion, falls to his death in the aftermath of the struggle, finally bringing an end to the immediate threat he posed to the family. Fester, though he manages to survive the fall by clinging to the structure with his newly formed tentacles, is left severely weakened by the encounter, his body having endured far more strain than it can safely handle. Wednesday's choice. This is where Wednesday's arc reaches its true emotional resolution. Faced with the sight of her Uncle Fester critically weakened and in danger, Wednesday does not hesitate. She reaches for the necklace Morticia gave her earlier during their stop at the Grand Canyon, the very keepsake containing a small vial of the family's blood, and uses it to help restore Fester back to his normal state, ultimately saving his life in the process. This moment functions as the true thematic climax of the entire film. Throughout the story, Wednesday has been wrestling with uncertainty about where she truly belongs, tempted by the promise of validation and understanding from someone who initially seemed to appreciate her talents in ways her own family sometimes struggled to express. But in this single, decisive action, using a gift given to her out of pure familial love to save someone she cares about, Wednesday demonstrates, both to herself and to her family, that her loyalty and her heart have never truly wavered. It is not blood tests or biological proof that define who her family truly is, it is love, sacrifice, and genuine connection. Having witnessed everything unfold, Wednesday finally embraces where she belongs with complete confidence and clarity. Whatever uncertainty she carried with her throughout this long, chaotic journey dissolves in this moment of crisis, replaced by a renewed and unshakable understanding of what family truly means to her. coming home. With the immediate danger resolved, the Addams family begins their journey back home, emotionally exhausted but undeniably closer than they were when this entire adventure began. The film uses this final stretch to tie up a few lingering threads from earlier in the story. Ophelia, a character connected to Cyrus Strange throughout the film's events, is welcomed by the family as she transitions into an ordinary human life, finding an unexpected place among the people who ultimately treated her with more warmth and acceptance than her own creator ever did. Back at the mansion, we also return briefly to Grandmama, whose impromptu party business, run entirely without the rest of the family's knowledge, has apparently been thriving in their absence, adding one last comedic beat to close out the film's various subplots. It is a nice reminder that even while the central family was away dealing with monsters, manipulation, and emotional upheaval, life at the Addams estate continued in its own uniquely chaotic fashion. In the film's final moments, Gomez and Wednesday share a quiet, tender exchange addressing the lingering confusion surrounding her earlier DNA test results. Gomez, in typical Addams Family fashion, reveals a small and rather amusing personal secret involving his own hair, playfully explaining the unexpected results Wednesday encountered earlier in the story. It is a light-hearted way to resolve what had been, up to that point, one of the film's more emotionally serious plot threads, allowing the story to end on a note of warmth, humor, and genuine familial affection rather than lingering tension. The film closes with Gomez, ever the enthusiastic patriarch, already looking ahead toward future adventures, playfully promising his family an even grander trip somewhere in the wider world the next time around. It is a fitting conclusion for a story fundamentally about togetherness, reminding audiences one final time that despite everything strange, chaotic, and occasionally monstrous that this family experiences, their bond with one another remains the true heart of everything they do. What the story is really about. Stepping back from the plot itself, it is worth spending a little time reflecting on what the Addams Family too is ultimately trying to communicate underneath all of its humor and spectacle. At its core, this is a story about the universal anxiety parents feel watching their children grow older and more independent, paired with the equally universal uncertainty children feel while trying to figure out exactly who they are and where they truly belong. The film takes these very ordinary, relatable emotional experiences and filters them through the exaggerated, gothic, wonderfully strange lens of the Addams Family, allowing audiences to laugh at monster transformations and haunted campers while still connecting emotionally with the very real family dynamics playing out underneath the surface. The character of Cyrus Strange, for all his exaggerated villainy, effectively represents a very real kind of danger, the appeal of validation from someone who seems to understand you better than the people who actually know and love you. His entire manipulation of Wednesday works specifically because it exploits genuine, relatable insecurities, and the film smartly avoids making Wednesday seem foolish for being tempted by his offer. Instead, it treats her uncertainty with real empathy, allowing her ultimate choice to embrace her family to feel like a genuine, earned realization rather than a simple return to the status quo. Similarly, Uncle Fester's arc throughout the film, though largely played for comedic effect until its dramatic climax, ultimately reinforces the same central theme. His willingness to sacrifice himself in order to protect Wednesday and the rest of the family, despite the physical toll his transformation has already taken on him, stands as a quiet but powerful demonstration of what genuine familial love looks like in action, especially when contrasted directly against Cyrus Strange's cold, self-serving ambition. Even smaller subplots throughout the film, like Pugsley's repeated attempts to prove his own worth throughout the road trip, tie back into this same overarching theme. Every member of this family, in their own strange and exaggerated way, is searching for reassurance that they matter, that they are seen, and that they belong exactly where they are. The film's ultimate message is that this reassurance does not come from grand gestures, trophies, or scientific validation from outsiders, but from the everyday, imperfect, occasionally chaotic act of simply showing up for one another, again and again, no matter how strange the journey gets along the way. Oscar Isaac, who voices Gomez Addams, was born on the 9th of March in 1979 in Guatemala City, Guatemala. His mother, Maria Eugenia Estrada Nicole, is Guatemalan, while his father, Oscar Gonzalo Hernandez Cano, is a Cuban-born pulmonologist. When Isaac was still an infant, only a few months old, his family relocated to the United States so that his father could complete his medical residency training. The family moved several times during his earliest years, first settling briefly in Baltimore before spending time in New Orleans, and eventually putting down roots in Miami, Florida when Isaac was around 6 years old. Growing up in Miami exposed him to a strong Latin cultural identity, though he has spoken in interviews about feeling somewhat out of place in the city's more conservative and materialistic undertones during his teenage years. As a young boy, Isaac discovered a passion for performance in middle school, taking part in theatrical productions that sparked his earliest interest in acting. During his teenage years, however, music competed just as strongly for his attention. He picked up the guitar at the age of 12 and became deeply involved in the local punk and ska scene, performing as a guitarist and vocalist in various bands, including a group called the Blinking Underdogs, with whom he toured and even opened for acts as major as Green Day. For a time, Isaac seriously considered pursuing music as a full-time career rather than acting. After finishing high school, he stayed in Florida for several years, earning an associate degree from Miami-Dade Community College while continuing to perform in regional theater and with his band. His first true professional acting work came through children's theater productions with the Coconut Grove Playhouse. Around the year 2000, Isaac traveled to New York City to appear in a play, and during this visit he made the pivotal decision to audition for the prestigious drama division at the Juilliard School. He was accepted and spent several years training intensively as part of the school's acting program, graduating in 2005. Shortly after completing his studies, he landed a role in a Shakespeare in the Park production alongside Rosario Dawson, and from there his film career began to take shape gradually through supporting roles in a wide range of projects throughout the following decade. His breakthrough into major recognition came with his lead performance in the Coen brothers' acclaimed drama about a struggling folk musician, which earned him a Golden Globe nomination and firmly established him as a serious dramatic talent in Hollywood. From there, his career expanded rapidly into blockbuster territory, taking on high-profile roles in major science fiction and superhero franchises throughout the 2010s, while continuing to balance those larger commercial projects with smaller, more intimate character-driven films. By the time he took on the role of Gomez Addams, Isaac had already established himself as one of the most versatile and respected actors of his generation, known for bringing both intensity and warmth to every character he portrays, qualities that translate beautifully into his portrayal of the endlessly passionate and loving Addams Family patriarch. Charlize Theron, who lends her voice to Morticia Addams, was born on the 7th of August in 1975 in Benoni, a town near Johannesburg in South Africa. She grew up on a working farm owned by her parents, Charles and Gerda Theron, who ran a road construction business together. Life on the farm was physically demanding, with young Charlize helping to tend to livestock, but she also displayed an early passion for dance, beginning ballet lessons around the age of 6. Her talent for dance was significant enough that by the time she was around 12 or 13 years old, her parents sent her to a boarding school in Johannesburg specifically to continue her training in a more serious environment. Theron's childhood, however, was also marked by profound hardship at home. Her father struggled with alcoholism and became physically abusive toward the family over the years. In 1991, when Theron was 15 years old, a violent confrontation at home ended when her mother shot and killed her father in an act of self-defense after he attacked them both while drunk. No charges were filed against her mother, as the shooting was ruled justifiable, but the trauma of that night remained a defining and painful chapter of Theron's early life. At 16, seeking a new path forward, Theron left South Africa to pursue a modeling career in Milan, Italy, after winning a local modeling competition. 2 years later, she moved to New York City, where she enrolled at the Joffrey Ballet School, still holding on to her original dream of becoming a professional dancer. Unfortunately, a severe knee injury eventually made it impossible for her to continue pursuing dance at a competitive level, forcing her to abandon that lifelong ambition. Encouraged by her mother to find a new direction, Theron relocated to Los Angeles with very little beyond her own determination. According to the well-known story of her discovery, she was in a bank attempting to cash a check when a heated exchange with the teller caught the attention of a talent manager who happened to be nearby, leading to her introduction into the acting world. Early in her career, she worked hard to shed her strong South African accent in order to compete for American roles, spending countless hours studying television performances to refine her speech. Her breakthrough into serious dramatic acclaim came with her transformative portrayal of a real-life serial killer in a biographical drama released in the early 2000s, a performance that earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress and made her the first South African performer to win in a major acting category. In the years since, Theron has built one of the most respected and diverse filmographies in modern Hollywood, taking on everything from intense action roles to quiet dramatic performances, all while becoming a naturalized United States citizen and remaining proudly connected to her South African roots. Chloe Grace Moretz, who voices Wednesday Addams, was born on the 10th of February in 1997 in Atlanta, Georgia. She is the youngest of 5 children, with 4 older brothers, and her parents, Terry and McCoy Moretz, worked respectively as a nurse practitioner and a plastic surgeon. Moretz's introduction to the entertainment industry actually began through her older brother Trevor, who was accepted into a prestigious performing arts school in New York City. The family relocated to support his budding career, and it was during this period that young Chloe, inspired by watching her brother pursue his passion, began expressing interest in acting herself. She started taking acting classes around the age of 7, and her very first roles came through small television appearances before she landed a breakout part in a horror remake in 2005, playing the youngest member of a family terrorized by supernatural forces in their new home. This early role set the stage for a career that would frequently see Moretz drawn to dark, intense, and mature material even while she was still a child performer. A pattern that continued when she trained for months with a professional stunt team to prepare for a highly physical action role in 2010 that ultimately became her true breakout performance and earned her widespread critical praise for her commitment and skill. Unlike many child actors who struggle to transition into successful adult careers, Moretz managed to maintain steady momentum throughout her teenage years, taking on a wide range of roles across horror, drama, and comedy genres. She also expanded into modeling, appearing in major fashion publications, and even made her stage debut in an off-Broadway production directed by an acclaimed filmmaker. Her parents divorced when she was 12 years old, an experience she has spoken about candidly in interviews as being genuinely difficult for her emotionally. Throughout her career, Moretz has continued to balance blockbuster franchise work with smaller independent films, consistently seeking out roles that challenge her as a performer. Her voice work as Wednesday Addams captures the character's dry wit and gradual emotional growth with the same range and depth that has defined her acting career since childhood. Nick Kroll, who provides the voice of Uncle Fester, was born Nicholas Kroll on the 5th of June in 1978 in Rye, New York, a well-to-do suburb along the Long Island Sound. He was the youngest of 4 children born to Jules Kroll, the founder of a major corporate intelligence and risk consulting firm, and Lynn Kroll. Raised in a conservative Jewish household that placed a strong emphasis on education and storytelling, Kroll attended a Hebrew day school before moving on to an elite private high school, where he began participating in school plays as a way of seeking attention as the youngest child in a large family. He went on to attend Georgetown University, graduating in 2001 with a degree in history, though by his own account he found himself increasingly drawn toward media and performance during his college years. After graduating, Kroll immersed himself fully in the competitive New York comedy scene, performing stand-up regularly and training extensively in improvisational comedy at the well-regarded Upright Citizens Brigade Theater. His early career included writing contributions to popular television comedy programs and small guest appearances on various shows, slowly building his reputation within the comedy community. His first major breakthrough came when he was cast in a lead role on an FX sitcom about a close-knit group of friends obsessed with fantasy football, a role that ran for several years and turned him into a recognizable comedic presence. He later created and starred in his own sketch comedy series on Comedy Central, which allowed him to showcase a wide range of original characters inspired by American pop culture and suburban life. Beyond live-action work, Kroll has become especially well known for his extensive voice acting career, most notably as the co-creator and star of an adult animated coming-of-age series that has become one of the most acclaimed and long-running animated shows of its era, exploring themes of puberty and adolescence with surprising emotional honesty beneath its crude humor. His comedic sensibility, capable of shifting between broad silliness and genuine emotional vulnerability, translates naturally into his portrayal of Uncle Fester, a character who spends much of the Addams Family balancing comic relief with real heart. Javon Walton, who voices Pugsley Addams in this sequel, was born on the 22nd of July in 2006 in Atlanta, Georgia. Long before he became known as an actor, Walton was already making a name for himself as a remarkable athletic talent, beginning boxing training at just 4 years old under the guidance of his father, a boxing coach who founded his own athletic training program. By the time he was still a young child, Walton had already become a multiple-time Georgia state champion in both boxing and competitive gymnastics, amassing dozens of amateur victories and earning a sponsorship from a major athletic brand, making him one of the youngest athletes ever signed by the company. His path into acting came somewhat unexpectedly, after a television appearance discussing his boxing career caught the attention of a casting director, who reached out to his family about the possibility of auditioning for a new HBO drama series. Walton's family agreed, and his subsequent audition, which reportedly included him rapping to showcase his personality, impressed the show's creator enough to cast him in a prominent recurring role that would go on to define his early acting career and introduce him to audiences worldwide. Homeschooled throughout much of his childhood in order to accommodate his intense athletic training schedule, Walton was able to pursue acting alongside his sports career without significant scheduling conflicts. His voice role as Pugsley in the Addams Family came relatively early in his acting journey, allowing him to step into an established animated franchise role that had previously been voiced by a different young actor in the first film. Since then, Walton has continued building his acting resume across streaming series and feature films, while also eventually transitioning into professional boxing as a young adult, demonstrating the same dedication and drive that defined his childhood in both of his chosen fields. Bette Midler, who voices the boisterous grandmama, was born on the 1st of December in 1945 in Honolulu, Hawaii, making her one of the more unconventional origin stories among major American entertainers of her generation. She was raised in modest circumstances in Aiea, Hawaii, the daughter of Fred Midler, a painter who worked for the United States Navy, and Ruth Midler, a homemaker. Interestingly, she was named after the classic Hollywood actress Bette Davis, an early sign of the show business destiny that seemed to await her. As a child, Midler discovered a genuine love for performing, famously singing in front of her first-grade class and winning recognition for her voice even at that young age. Her passion for theater deepened further after watching a stage production of a classic Broadway musical at around 12 years old, an experience that convinced her she wanted to become a performer herself. She attended the University of Hawaii as a drama major for approximately 1 year before making the bold decision to leave school entirely in order to pursue a career on stage. Her earliest professional break came through a small role in a film production shot partially in Hawaii, which led her to relocate to Los Angeles when filming wrapped. She spent the following years working various part-time jobs to support herself while pursuing performing opportunities. Midler eventually made her way to New York City, where she landed a role in the national touring and Broadway productions of a major musical. It was during this period that she began performing regularly at a well-known New York venue, developing her flamboyant and larger-than-life stage persona that would soon become her signature style. This period of her career led to her being discovered by a prominent record executive, resulting in her debut album, which launched her into stardom as both a recording artist and stage performer. Midler went on to build an extraordinarily diverse career spanning music, film, and theater across the following decades, earning numerous prestigious awards along the way, and her larger-than-life energy and comedic timing make her a perfect fit for the eccentric and endlessly entertaining grandmama. Snoop Dogg, who voices the memorable cousin Itt, was born Calvin Cortazar Broadus Jr. on the 20th of October in 1971 in Long Beach, California. Raised primarily by his mother after his parents separated when he was still very young, Snoop developed an early passion for music, singing in his local church choir and learning to play the piano as a child. His mother gave him the nickname that would eventually become his stage name, noticing his resemblance to a beloved cartoon character. Growing up in Long Beach during a period marked by significant gang activity in the surrounding neighborhoods, Snoop became associated with street culture during his teenage years, an experience that would later heavily influence the themes and storytelling style found throughout his music. He began rapping as early as 6th grade, and after graduating from Long Beach Polytechnic High School in 1989, he faced a difficult period that included legal trouble and time spent in and out of custody related to drug-related arrests. During this challenging chapter of his life, Snoop continued developing his craft, recording homemade tapes with his cousins and close friends under a shared group name. One of his early freestyle recordings eventually reached the influential producer responsible for shaping much of the West Coast hip-hop sound of the era, leading to a pivotal audition that changed the course of his life entirely. He was soon signed to a major record label, and his debut solo album became an enormous commercial and critical success, establishing him, almost overnight, as one of the defining voices in hip-hop history. In the decades since, Snoop Dogg has continued to evolve far beyond music alone, building an extensive career in film, television, business, and entertainment more broadly, ultimately transforming himself from a controversial young artist into one of the most universally recognized and beloved entertainment figures in the world, a journey that makes his warm, family-friendly presence as cousin Itt feel like a natural extension of his broader career reinvention. Bill Hader, who voices the mysterious scientist Cyrus Strange, was born William Thomas Hader Jr. on the 7th of June in 1978 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. His mother, Sherry, worked as a dance teacher, while his father held a variety of jobs over the years, including work as a truck driver, and occasionally performed stand-up comedy on the side. Hader has described his childhood as somewhat on the fringes of typical school social life, identifying more as a devoted film enthusiast and class clown who formed his own small group of similarly minded friends. He attended Cassia Hall Preparatory School in Tulsa, where he began making amateur short films with friends, an early sign of his lifelong fascination with filmmaking and visual comedy. After high school, Hader studied briefly at the Art Institute of Phoenix before transferring to Scottsdale Community College, though he ultimately did not complete a traditional degree, choosing instead to move to Los Angeles to pursue a career in the film industry directly. His early years in Hollywood were spent working behind the scenes as a production assistant on a number of film and television projects, gaining valuable first-hand experience in how the industry actually operated. Alongside this behind-the-scenes work, Hader became involved in Los Angeles's competitive comedy scene, performing with respected improvisational troupes and gradually building a reputation for his sharp comedic instincts and remarkable talent for celebrity impressions. He was eventually noticed by an established actress within the comedy world, who helped connect him with the producers of a major late-night sketch comedy institution. Hader joined the show as a featured player in 2005 and remained a core cast member for 8 seasons, becoming particularly well known for his uncanny impressions of numerous public figures as well as several original characters that became fan favorites. Following his departure from the show, Hader continued building an increasingly acclaimed career, eventually co-creating, writing, directing, and starring in a critically praised dark comedy television series that showcased his ability to blend humor with genuine dramatic depth, earning him multiple major industry awards in the process. His voice performance as the enigmatic and ultimately villainous Cyrus Strange allows him to bring that same layered blend of charm and unease that has defined much of his most celebrated work. Wallace Shawn, who plays the persistent lawyer Mr. Mustila, was born in New York City in 1943, the elder son of William Shawn, the longtime and highly respected editor of the New Yorker magazine, and Cecile Shawn. Growing up in a household deeply immersed in literary and intellectual culture undoubtedly shaped Shawn's own creative instincts from an early age. He attended the Dalton School and later the Putney School before going on to study history at Harvard University, graduating in 1965. Rather than immediately pursuing a career in the arts, Shawn initially harbored ambitions of becoming a diplomat, and he continued his education by studying philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University in England. During his time in England, and later while working as a Fulbright teaching fellow in India, Shawn began writing his first play, an experience that ultimately redirected his career path entirely away from diplomacy and toward the world of theater. Returning to New York, Shawn immersed himself fully in the city's off-Broadway theater scene throughout the 1970s, establishing himself first and foremost as a serious and often provocative playwright, earning early acclaim and awards for several works that explored complex and sometimes controversial themes with a distinctive, unsettling style. Although his primary identity was as a writer, Shawn eventually took up acting as well, initially as a means of better understanding performance from the inside in order to strengthen his own playwriting. He made his film acting debut in 1979, and throughout the following decade built a reputation as one of the most instantly recognizable character actors in American film and television, known for a distinctive voice and delivery that became a favorite tool for filmmakers looking to cast eccentric, intellectual, or comically anxious supporting characters. He became especially beloved among younger audiences for a memorable villainous role in a well-known 1980s fantasy adventure film, as well as for extensive voice acting work in family-friendly animated franchises throughout his later career. Shawn's ability to bring a mixture of comic absurdity and quiet menace to his performances makes him a perfect fit for the slippery, unsettling lawyer character who spends much of the Addams Family pursuing the family across the country. Together, this remarkable ensemble of performers, each carrying their own unique journey through the entertainment industry, brought a level of depth, humor, and heart to the Addams Family that helped make this animated sequel such a memorable and enjoyable experience for audiences of all ages. The Addams Family to talk about how this animated sequel actually came together, what it cost to make, how the pandemic completely reshaped the way this film was produced, and some of the genuinely funny stories that came out of the recording booths, both literal and improvised, where this movie's voice cast brought these characters to life. Animated films rarely get the same behind-the-scenes attention that live-action blockbusters receive, but there's a surprising amount of fascinating and often very funny material buried in the production history of this particular film, so let us dig into it properly. The money behind the madness. Let us start with the numbers, because understanding the budget and financial context of the Addams Family tells us a lot about how the studio approached this project. The film was produced on a reported budget of approximately $23 million, a figure that places it firmly in the mid-budget range for major studio animated films, especially when compared to the far larger budgets typically associated with animation powerhouses like Pixar or DreamWorks Animation on their biggest tentpole releases. This modest budget was actually consistent with the approach taken on the original 2019 film, which was also made for around $24 million and went on to perform remarkably well at the global box office, earning north of $200 million worldwide against that relatively small production cost. That kind of return on investment is exactly the sort of result that studios dream about, and it is precisely why a sequel was greenlit so quickly. In fact, the decision to move forward with a second film came almost immediately after the first movie's opening weekend in October of 2019, when it became clear that audiences had responded enthusiastically to this modernized take on the classic macabre family. Given that strong financial foundation, the studio behind the Addams Family 2, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, working alongside production partners including Braun Creative, Cinesight Studios, and additional financing and production entities, moved forward with a sequel using a similar budget structure to the original film. Keeping costs controlled while still delivering a visually rich, texturally detailed animated world is no small feat, and it speaks to the efficiency of the animation pipeline that the studio had already built during production of the first movie. Much of that efficiency came from reusing established character models, environments, and technical workflows from the first installment, allowing the animation teams to focus their creative energy and budget on new elements introduced specifically for this road trip-focused sequel, such as the family's elaborate and suitably ominous camper vehicle, along with an entirely new roster of American landmarks and environments the family visits throughout their journey. Speaking of the animation itself, the visual work for the Addams Family 2 was handled primarily by Cinesight Studios, with significant contributions coming from the studio's Vancouver and Montreal facilities. Animated films of this scale typically require an enormous collaborative workforce spanning multiple departments, and this project was no exception. Hundreds of artists, animators, technical directors, riggers, lighting specialists, and compositing professionals worked across the production pipeline, taking the film from early storyboard sketches all the way through to the polished, fully rendered frames that eventually appeared on movie screens around the world. When you consider that an animated feature like this one contains well over 1,000 individual shots, each requiring careful attention to character movement, lighting, texture, and comedic timing, the sheer scale of collaborative effort required to complete a film like this within a reasonable production timeline becomes genuinely impressive. Despite that impressive production effort, the film's theatrical box office performance ultimately fell short of expectations, particularly when compared to its predecessor. While exact figures vary slightly depending on the source and reporting period, the Addams Family 2 grossed close to $120 million worldwide, which, while still profitable relative to its production budget, represented a noticeably softer performance than the first film's box office run. Several factors contributed to this outcome, and it is worth taking a moment to unpack them, because they tell an interesting story about the state of the film industry at that particular moment in time. The pandemic factor. It is impossible to properly discuss the production and release of the Addams Family 2 without addressing the massive elephant in the room, the ongoing global pandemic that was still very much affecting daily life, business operations, and the entertainment industry as a whole throughout 2020 and 2021, the exact window during which this film was being finished and prepared for release. The pandemic did not just affect how audiences experienced the film in theaters. It fundamentally altered how the film itself was made behind the scenes, particularly when it came to recording the voice performances that bring these characters to life. Under normal circumstances, voice actors working on an animated film will often travel to a professional recording studio, sit in a soundproof booth with a director present in the adjoining control room, and work through their lines together in a collaborative, in-person environment. Sometimes actors even record scenes together if their characters interact heavily, allowing for a more natural back-and-forth energy that can genuinely enhance comedic timing and emotional authenticity. Because of pandemic-related restrictions on travel and in-person gatherings, much of this traditional process became impossible during a significant portion of the film's production schedule. Instead, the studio had to get remarkably creative, essentially transforming the recording process into a decentralized, work-from-home operation almost overnight. Director Conrad Vernon, who co-directed the film alongside Greg Tiernan, spoke candidly in interviews about just how strange and logistically complicated this shift became. In a normal animated film production, directing involves sitting in literal chairs, moving from one department to another, speaking directly with animators, editors, layout artists, and character designers as the film comes together piece by piece across dozens of collaborative departments. Vernon has joked that directing an animated film essentially just means sitting in a lot of different chairs throughout the day as you move between these various creative conversations. But during the pandemic, when the entire production team shifted to remote work conducted primarily over video calls, that dynamic collapsed down into something far more isolated. Suddenly, instead of moving between departments and studios throughout the day, Vernon found himself simply sitting in one single chair in his own home, running the entire directing process through a computer screen. Beyond the obvious logistical challenges of coordinating an enormous creative team entirely through video conferencing, one of the biggest hurdles involved actually getting the physical recording equipment needed for professional quality voice work into the homes of dozens of actors scattered across different cities. Vernon has described the scale of this operation as genuinely staggering, noting that the production team had to ship and set up functional home recording studios in approximately 200 different locations, ensuring that every piece of equipment worked correctly and that audio quality remained consistent enough to be usable in a professional theatrical release. This was an enormous undertaking that most audiences watching the finished film likely never even considered, but it represents a remarkable behind-the-scenes achievement in adapting to an unprecedented global situation without sacrificing the technical quality of the final product. Funny stories from the makeshift recording booths. Now, let us get into some of the genuinely entertaining and memorable anecdotes that emerged from this unusual, pandemic-era recording process, because there are some wonderfully funny stories here that give real insight into the personalities behind these characters. Perhaps the most amusing and widely shared story involves Bill Hader, who voices the mysterious and ultimately villainous Cyrus Strange. Hader has spoken in multiple interviews about the genuinely bizarre setup he had to create in order to record his lines from home during the height of pandemic restrictions. Rather than a proper soundproof booth, Hader found himself literally sitting underneath a thick comforter in his own bedroom, holding the blanket up over his head to help dampen outside noise and create some semblance of proper studio acoustics, while balancing a microphone in one hand and reading his script directly off his phone with the other. He has described this setup as easily the strangest recording session of his entire career, joking afterward that this improvised blanket fort method might just become his permanent recording setup going forward, since apparently it worked well enough to make it into the finished film. It is a wonderfully human and relatable image, one of Hollywood's most recognizable comedic actors, known for his uncanny impressions and precise vocal work, hunched under a bedspread in his own house, doing his absolute best to deliver a convincing, menacing performance as a mad scientist while essentially recreating a childhood blanket fort in the process. Hader also touched on another interesting side effect of this pandemic-era production process, noting that unlike some of his previous animated film experiences, where he occasionally crossed paths with fellow cast members either during recording sessions or at industry events afterward, he genuinely never met or spoke with any of his The Addams Family 2 castmates throughout the entire production. Voice acting work is often a fairly isolated experience even under normal circumstances, since actors typically record their lines separately in individual sessions with the director rather than performing scenes together, as a full ensemble. But the added isolation of pandemic-era remote recording took that separation to an entirely new level, meaning that despite starring alongside major names like Oscar Isaac, Charlize Theron, and Bette Midler in the same film, Hader completed his entire involvement in the project without ever crossing paths with any of them in person. Javon Walton, who took over voicing Pugsley Addams for this sequel, shared his own version of this pandemic-era recording adaptation, revealing that the production team actually built an entire functional recording studio setup inside his family's basement specifically so he could safely record his lines while adhering to the health restrictions in place at the time. Walton has described this experience as genuinely exciting from his perspective, particularly given that he was still relatively new to voice acting work, having primarily built his early career through intense, dramatic live-action roles in projects dealing with far heavier subject matter. Walking down into his own basement to record dialogue for a light-hearted, family-friendly animated film represented a welcome and enjoyable change of pace for him, and having professional equipment installed in such a personal, familiar space added a layer of novelty to the entire experience. Perhaps the most delightfully absurd production story from the entire film involves Snoop Dogg's voice work for the character of Cousin ITT. If you have ever wondered how the filmmakers managed to create Cousin IDT's distinctive, rapid, high-pitched babbling dialogue, the answer is both simple and genuinely funny once you learn the technique involved. According to Conrad Vernon, every single sound that comes out of Cousin ITT throughout both Addams Family films, including all of the characters' seemingly nonsensical chatter, is actually Snoop Dogg's real voice, simply recorded, reversed, and sped up during the audio editing process. For the first film, Vernon revealed that rather than having Snoop recite carefully constructed nonsensical dialogue, much of the characters' babbling in that movie was actually just casual conversation between Vernon and Snoop Dogg about basketball, specifically discussions about the Los Angeles Lakers, that were later manipulated in post-production to create Cousin ITT's chaotic vocal pattern. For the sequel, however, the production team wanted something a bit more substantial and story-relevant rather than simply repurposing casual conversation. This time around, one of the film's comedy writers crafted specific, genuinely funny lines tied directly to the plot and to Cousin ITT's character, which Snoop Dogg then performed in the recording booth. Once again, this dialogue was reversed and sped up during post-production to create the character's signature sound. What this means, quite amusingly, is that if any curious fan were determined enough to isolate Cousin ITT's dialogue from the film, reverse it back to its original speed and direction, they would actually be able to hear Snoop Dogg delivering perfectly coherent, scripted comedic lines written specifically for this film. A genuinely clever and very funny piece of movie-making trivia that most casual viewers would never suspect while simply enjoying Cousin ITT's chaotic on-screen energy. Another wonderfully entertaining behind-the-scenes detail involves director Conrad Vernon's dual role on this production, since Vernon not only co-directed the film but also personally provides the speaking voice for Lurch, the family's towering, famously monosyllabic butler. Vernon has explained in interviews that he had previously worked with himself, so to speak, in this exact vocal capacity during production of the first Addams Family film, and found that his own natural speaking voice worked remarkably well for the character without requiring significant vocal alteration. For the sequel, however, the filmmakers decided to push Lurch's characterization further, particularly during a memorable sequence late in the film where the character gradually spirals into a state of complete, unhinged chaos. Rather than creating an entirely different vocal performance to represent this shift, Vernon and his fellow director simply had him gradually increase the intensity and instability of his existing voice work throughout the recording sessions, essentially notching Lurch's performance up incrementally toward complete comedic madness by the film's climax. Vernon has joked that this was genuinely entertaining to record, though he was admittedly grateful that Lurch was not required to sustain that level of unhinged energy across the entire film, since maintaining that kind of vocal intensity throughout an entire production would have been thoroughly exhausting. Interestingly, while Vernon provides Lurch's regular speaking voice throughout the film, a separate vocal performer named Dominic Lewis was brought in specifically to provide Lurch's singing voice during one of the film's most memorable and genuinely charming sequences, a scene set inside a rowdy roadside biker bar where Lurch unexpectedly breaks into a full musical performance of the classic disco anthem I Will Survive, originally made famous by Gloria Gaynor. In this scene, Wednesday, believing she is instructing Lurch to intimidate or fight the intimidating bikers surrounding them, actually watches in confusion as Lurch instead sits down at a piano and delivers a surprisingly soulful and winning musical performance, ultimately charming the entire bar rather than starting a confrontation. It is one of the film's most purely joyful and unexpected moments, and the decision to bring in a dedicated singing voice performer specifically for this sequence, rather than relying on Vernon's regular speaking voice for Lurch, speaks to just how much care and specific attention went into making sure this particular scene landed with maximum comedic and musical impact. Music and soundtrack surprises. Speaking of music, The Addams Family 2 features a genuinely eclectic and star-studded soundtrack that deserves its own moment of attention, because the film brought together an unusually diverse lineup of musical talent for its various featured songs. The soundtrack includes an original track called Crazy Family, performed through a collaboration between major recording artists Megan Thee Stallion and Maluma alongside the production group Rock Mafia, blending hip-hop and Latin pop influences into a song that plays during some of the film's more energetic sequences. Additionally, a song titled My Family, performed by the artist Yoshi Flower, appears within the film's soundtrack as well, contributing to the movie's broader musical identity beyond its orchestral score. As mentioned earlier, the memorable Roadhouse rendition of I Will Survive, performed in character by Dominic Lewis as Lurch, stands as one of the soundtrack's most distinctive and purely entertaining inclusions, transforming a beloved disco classic into a surprisingly touching character moment within the film. On top of these featured songs, Snoop Dogg himself contributed an original track titled It Ain't Nothin', performed alongside fellow artist October London, giving Snoop's involvement in the project a musical dimension that extends well beyond his voice acting work as Cousin ITT. Perhaps most surprisingly of all, the film also features a modernized rendition of the iconic and instantly recognizable Addams Family theme song, this time performed by pop superstar Christina Aguilera, giving the franchise's signature finger-snapping melody a fresh, contemporary vocal treatment for a new generation of viewers. Bringing together such a genuinely varied and high-profile group of musical artists for what is, at its core, a family animated film demonstrates just how much creative ambition and financial investment went into crafting the overall audio identity of this project, extending far beyond simply hiring a talented voice cast for the dialogue itself. The road trip concept, and its real-world timing. One particularly interesting piece of behind-the-scenes context involves the film's central road trip premise, and how unexpectedly well it ended up aligning with real-world circumstances at the time of the movie's release. Conrad Vernon has revealed in interviews that the decision to send the Addams Family out on a cross-country road trip for this sequel was actually conceived well before the pandemic became a dominant global concern. The directing team had simply wanted to get the family out of their familiar mansion setting and into a wider variety of new environments and comedic situations, continuing a pattern Vernon had previously explored in his work directing road trip-focused sequences in other major animated franchises earlier in his career. However, once the pandemic hit and significantly altered typical American travel patterns, with many families choosing to avoid air travel in favor of car-based road trips and recreational vehicle vacations as a safer alternative during that uncertain period, the film's already established road trip concept ended up feeling remarkably timely and relevant almost by pure coincidence. Vernon has noted with some surprise just how fortunate this timing turned out to be, since the film's central premise, conceived long before anyone could have anticipated a global pandemic reshaping travel habits, ended up mirroring a very real and relatable experience that many families watching the film had recently gone through themselves. Challenges beyond the recording booth. Of course, the pandemic's impact on this production extended well beyond simply altering how voice recording sessions were conducted. The broader animation pipeline itself, involving hundreds of artists working across multiple studio locations in different countries, also had to adapt significantly to remote and hybrid working conditions throughout much of the film's production schedule. Coordinating complex creative decisions across character design, environmental art, lighting, and animation typically benefits enormously from in-person collaboration, where artists and directors can quickly review work together, make adjustments in real time, and maintain a consistent creative vision across an enormous team. Shifting much of this collaborative process into a remote, video conference-based workflow undoubtedly added additional layers of complexity and communication challenges throughout the production timeline, even if these particular struggles received far less public attention than the more visibly unusual voice recording adaptations. Beyond the production challenges themselves, the pandemic also significantly affected how The Addams Family 2 was ultimately released and marketed to audiences. Unlike the first film, which enjoyed a fairly conventional and successful theatrical release in 2019, this sequel arrived in theaters during a period when movie-going habits had been fundamentally disrupted by ongoing health concerns, particularly amid renewed concern over the spread of the Delta variant during the fall of 2021. To accommodate audiences who remained hesitant about returning to crowded indoor movie theaters, the studio made the decision to simultaneously release the film for online rental on the very same day it opened theatrically in the United States and Canada. A hybrid release strategy that had become increasingly common throughout the pandemic era, but that also likely affected the film's traditional theatrical box office performance, since audiences now had a convenient and safe alternative to seeing the film in a physical cinema. Reflecting on a unique production era. Looking back on the production history of The Addams Family 2, what emerges is a genuinely fascinating snapshot of an entire creative industry adapting in real time to an unprecedented global disruption. From directors conducting entire animated film productions through video calls sitting alone in a single chair, to major Hollywood actors recording pivotal dialogue from underneath bedroom comforters, to entire home recording studios being shipped and installed inside family basements. The making of this particular film captures a strange and genuinely unique moment in entertainment industry history that future filmmakers and film students will likely study for years to come as an example of pure creative adaptability under extraordinary circumstances. Despite all of these significant logistical hurdles, the finished film still managed to deliver the same core creative vision the directing team had originally set out to achieve, blending the family's signature gothic charm with a fresh road trip adventure, memorable musical moments, and plenty of the dry, deadpan humor longtime fans of this franchise have come to expect. While the film's box office performance may not have quite matched the resounding success of its 2019 predecessor, largely due to circumstances entirely outside the filmmaker's control, the sheer creative resourcefulness required simply to complete production during such a challenging period represents its own quiet, behind-the-scenes triumph. One that rarely gets the recognition it deserves when audiences simply sit down to enjoy the finished film without ever considering just how much unusual, improvised effort went into making it possible in the first place. We are pulling back even further from the plot and the production trivia we have already covered, and instead looking at the bigger cultural and historical picture surrounding the Addams Family 2. Where did this family actually come from? What do they represent within American popular culture? Why has this particular group of characters managed to stay relevant across nearly 9 decades of changing entertainment trends? And how does this specific animated sequel fit into both the long history of the Addams Family franchise and the broader traditions of American road trip storytelling? These are the questions we are going to explore today, so let us take a proper deep dive into the history and cultural weight sitting behind this seemingly light-hearted animated comedy. The origins of a cultural institution. To understand the Addams Family 2, you first have to understand where this family actually came from, and that story begins remarkably far back in American cultural history, long before animation, before television, and even before most of the technology we associate with modern entertainment existed in any recognizable form. The Addams Family originated in the pages of the New Yorker magazine, where cartoonist Charles Addams published the very first single-panel cartoon featuring what would eventually become this iconic macabre family on the 6th of August in 1938. At the time, these characters were not even named. They existed simply as a recurring cast of eerie, gothic figures appearing in unrelated single-panel gag cartoons, each one built around a dark, morbid, or unsettling visual joke rendered in Addams's distinctively detailed and atmospheric illustration style. Charles Addams, born in 1912 in Westfield, New Jersey, became a defining contributor to the New Yorker's visual identity throughout the middle decades of the 20th century, ultimately publishing well over 1,000 cartoons for the magazine across his long career, of which only a relatively small number, somewhere around 58 in total, actually featured what we now recognize as the Addams Family characters. Despite representing a fairly small fraction of his overall body of work, these particular cartoons resonated so strongly with readers that they eventually grew into something far larger than a simple recurring gag, evolving instead into one of the most enduring and instantly recognizable family units in all of American popular culture. What made these original cartoons so effective, and what continues to make every subsequent adaptation of these characters compelling nearly 90 years later, is the brilliantly simple comedic and satirical premise underlying the entire concept. The Addams Family functions as a direct, deliberate inversion of the idealized post-war American middle-class nuclear family, that wholesome, orderly, conventionally happy household image that dominated so much of mainstream American media and cultural messaging throughout the mid-20th century. Where a typical American family of that era was expected to value cheerfulness, conformity, safety, and suburban normalcy, the Addams Family instead delights openly in darkness, danger, decay, and the macabre, all while remaining completely convinced that their own lifestyle represents perfectly normal, respectable family values. This total sincerity is really the engine driving the humor across every single adaptation of these characters, including this most recent animated sequel. The Addams Family members never see themselves as strange, frightening, or abnormal. They are simply living their lives exactly as they believe a loving, functional family should, and it is only the reactions of the more conventional world around them that reveals just how genuinely unusual their perspective actually is. From silent cartoons to television household names. For roughly 25 years following their debut, the Addams Family characters existed purely within the pages of the New Yorker, appearing periodically in new single-panel cartoons without ever receiving names, backstories, or any kind of ongoing narrative continuity. This changed dramatically in 1964, when the ABC television network developed a live-action sitcom based directly on Addams's cartoon characters, working in direct collaboration with Addams himself to finally give these previously nameless figures actual identities. It was during this collaborative development process that the family members received the names we now know them by: Gomez, Morticia, Wednesday, Pugsley, Uncle Fester, Grandmama, and Lurch, along with the household's other memorable inhabitants like Thing and Cousin ITT. The television series, which aired for 2 seasons and 64 total episodes between 1964 and 1966, was notably shot entirely in black and white, a choice that, whether intentional or simply a product of the era's typical production standards, ended up complementing the show's gothic aesthetic remarkably well. Interestingly, the series was not a particularly dominant commercial success during its initial broadcast run, but it found a much larger and more devoted audience later on through television syndication, eventually cementing its status as a genuine cult classic and laying the groundwork for the character's enduring, multi-generational popularity. Here is a particularly interesting and somewhat ironic piece of cultural history worth mentioning, one that actually connects directly back to the cast of the Addams Family too in a rather unexpected way. During the original run of the 1964 television series, the New Yorker's longtime editor, William Shawn, made the deliberate decision to stop publishing any further Addams Family cartoons in the magazine, despite continuing to run Charles Addams's other unrelated cartoon work throughout this same period. Shawn reportedly felt that associating his magazine, which he considered aimed at a more sophisticated and refined literary readership, with characters who were now widely accessible to mainstream television audiences somehow diminished the material's original artistic prestige. It was not until Shawn's eventual retirement from the magazine in 1987 that the Addams Family characters were finally welcomed back into the New Yorker's pages, though Charles Addams himself passed away only a year later in 1988, meaning he only briefly got to see his most famous creations return to their original publishing home. What makes this piece of trivia especially fun in the context of the Addams Family too specifically is that William Shawn was, in fact, the father of actor Wallace Shawn, the very same performer who voices the persistent, slippery lawyer Mr. Mustela throughout this animated sequel. It is a wonderfully strange little historical coincidence that the actor voicing a character chasing down the Addams Family across America happens to be the son of the very magazine editor who once refused to let the Addams Family appear in print at all. The Sonnenfeld films and a new generation's introduction. Following a relatively quiet period throughout the 1970s and 1980s, aside from a brief animated series adaptation and an occasional television special, the Addams Family franchise experienced a major creative revival in the early 1990s through a pair of live-action feature films directed by Barry Sonnenfeld. The first of these films, released in 1991, introduced an entirely new cast portraying the family, and while it received somewhat mixed critical reception upon release, it performed strongly at the box office, helping reintroduce these characters to a new generation of moviegoers who may not have been alive during the original television series' initial broadcast run. A sequel followed in 1993, and interestingly, this second film experienced something of an inverse critical reception compared to its predecessor, often regarded by critics and longtime fans alike as an improvement over the first film in terms of tone, humor, and overall execution, even though it performed somewhat more modestly at the box office by comparison. These 1990s films played an enormously important role in shaping how mainstream audiences, particularly those without direct memory of the original 1960s television series, came to understand and appreciate these characters. The gothic, elaborately designed sets, the darkly stylish costume design, and particularly the note-perfect central performances brought these somewhat abstract cartoon and television characters into a fully realized, cinematic world that still holds up remarkably well as a beloved piece of nostalgic 1990s pop culture for many viewers today. The modern animated era. After another lengthy period of relative dormancy throughout the 2000s and much of the 2010s, aside from occasional licensing projects and merchandise, the Addams Family franchise experienced its most recent major revival with the release of the fully computer-animated feature film in 2019, the direct predecessor to the sequel we have been discussing throughout this entire video series. This modern animated approach represented a significant creative departure from the franchise's previous incarnations, translating these gothic, hand-drawn cartoon characters and their subsequent live-action portrayals into a fully three-dimensional, digitally animated aesthetic designed specifically to appeal to contemporary family audiences while still honoring the visual sensibility and comedic tone that Charles Addams originally established decades earlier. This decision to reintroduce the Addams Family through mainstream animated filmmaking reflects a broader and increasingly common trend within the modern entertainment industry, where beloved intellectual property from earlier generations gets periodically reimagined and reintroduced to new, younger audiences through updated visual formats and production techniques. Animation in particular offers filmmakers significant creative flexibility when adapting characters originally built around exaggerated, almost cartoonish physical designs, allowing the Addams Family's already stylized appearance, Morticia's impossibly narrow silhouette, Lurch's towering, hulking frame, and Uncle Fester's rounded, bald head, to translate naturally into a medium built entirely around exaggerated visual expression. The success of the 2019 animated film, which significantly outperformed its modest production budget at the global box office, demonstrated clearly that audience appetite for these characters remained strong even after so many decades and so many previous adaptations, ultimately leading directly to the production of this sequel we have spent so much time discussing throughout this video series. The road trip as an American storytelling tradition. One of the most culturally significant creative decisions made specifically for this sequel involves its central road trip structure, and it is worth spending some real time discussing why this particular narrative framework carries such deep resonance within American storytelling traditions more broadly. The road trip narrative occupies an enormously important and historically rich place within American literature, film, and popular culture, dating back through countless influential works that use cross-country travel as a vehicle, quite literally, for exploring themes of family, identity, freedom, and self-discovery. By sending the Addams family out onto America's highways, stopping at recognizable national landmarks and tourist destinations along the way, the Addams Family too deliberately places itself within this well-established tradition of American road trip storytelling, a genre that stretches from classic literary works exploring the vastness and diversity of the American landscape, through decades of beloved family comedy films built around chaotic cross-country vacations, all the way up through modern television and streaming content that continues returning to this same fundamental narrative structure again and again. What makes the road trip format so consistently appealing to storytellers across so many different genres and eras is its inherent ability to place characters into unfamiliar, uncontrolled environments, forcing them to interact with a constantly changing backdrop of new people, places, and situations, all while trapped together in uncomfortably close quarters that naturally heighten both comedic potential and emotional tension within a family unit. For the specifically eccentric and unconventional Addams Family, this road trip structure offers an especially rich comedic opportunity, since so much of the franchise's traditional humor relies on placing these deeply unusual characters into direct contact with conventional, mainstream American society and observing the resulting culture clash. Rather than simply staying within the relative isolation of their own Gothic mansion, sending the family out into crowded tourist attractions, roadside diners, and unfamiliar small towns across the country creates constant opportunities for exactly this kind of fish-out-of-water comedic tension that has defined the franchise since its earliest cartoon appearances. The symbolic weight of American landmarks. Beyond simply providing a comedic structural device, the specific American landmarks and locations featured throughout the family's journey in this film carry their own significant historical and cultural weight, adding an additional layer of meaning beneath the surface-level comedy. The family's stop at the Alamo, for instance, connects them directly to one of the most mythologized and historically significant sites in American history, a location deeply associated with themes of sacrifice, resistance, and the complicated, often romanticized narrative of American frontier expansion. Placing the deliberately anti-conventional Addams Family within this particular historically loaded setting creates an interesting, if light-hearted, juxtaposition between America's often solemn, reverent relationship with its own founding mythology and the family's characteristically irreverent, macabre worldview. Similarly, the family's visit to the Grand Canyon connects them to one of America's most iconic natural landmarks, a site that has long symbolized the sheer scale, majesty, and untamed wilderness of the American landscape within the broader cultural imagination. The Grand Canyon has served as a powerful symbolic backdrop across countless works of American literature, photography, and film throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, frequently representing themes of vastness, perspective, and the humbling power of nature when confronted by comparatively small human concerns and conflicts. Within the emotional context of this particular film, the Grand Canyon sequence takes on additional symbolic weight as well, serving as the specific location where several of the story's most significant emotional turning points occur, including Morticia's tender gift of the family blood necklace to Wednesday, A moment that quite literally ties the film's central theme of family bonds and identity directly to one of America's most historically and symbolically significant natural locations. The film's original setup also references the historic town of Salem, Massachusetts, a location carrying enormous weight within American cultural and religious history due to its association with the infamous Salem witch trials of the late 17th century, one of the most studied and culturally significant episodes of mass hysteria, religious extremism, and miscarried justice in early American colonial history. Given the Addams family's long-standing thematic connection to witchcraft, the occult, and various forms of supernatural folklore throughout their entire fictional history, dating all the way back to Charles Addams's original cartoons, the family's intended destination of Salem carries an obvious and fitting symbolic resonance. Even though the film's actual road trip plot ultimately deters away from this original destination due to the chaos unfolding throughout their journey. Themes of family, identity, and belonging. Perhaps the most culturally significant and emotionally resonant thematic thread running throughout the Addams Family too involves its central exploration of what genuinely defines family, particularly through Wednesday's central storyline questioning whether biological connection or lived, chosen relationship ultimately matters more in determining true familial belonging. This is, of course, an enormously significant and widely explored theme across countless works of literature, film, and television throughout recent decades, reflecting broader ongoing cultural conversations around adoption, blended families, chosen family structures within LGBTQ communities, and evolving societal definitions of what actually constitutes a legitimate family unit beyond strict traditional biological or legal definitions. By ultimately resolving Wednesday's central identity crisis through her decisive choice to save Uncle Fester using a symbolic vial of family blood, a keepsake given to her purely out of love rather than obligation, the film delivers a clear and culturally significant thematic statement, positioning genuine emotional connection, loyalty, and lived experience as fundamentally more important to true familial identity than strict biological relation alone. This message carries particular resonance within contemporary cultural conversations, where increasingly diverse and non-traditional family structures have become significantly more visible and openly discussed within mainstream media and popular culture compared to earlier decades, making this film's ultimate thematic conclusion feel notably aligned with broader ongoing shifts in how contemporary audiences think about and define family relationships more generally. Additionally, the film's exploration of Wednesday as a gifted young scientist, someone whose intelligence and unconventional interests are initially overlooked or dismissed by the broader institutional world around her, connects to significant and ongoing cultural conversations regarding the representation of young girls and women within science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields throughout mainstream media and popular entertainment. Wednesday's characterization throughout this film positions her clearly as a technically gifted, analytically minded young character whose scientific talents are genuine and impressive, even if her particular areas of interest, involving cross-species genetics, a film released during unprecedented times. Beyond the thematic content contained directly within the film itself, The Addams Family too also holds a particularly interesting and historically significant place simply due to the specific cultural and social moment during which it was released. Arriving in theaters in October of 2021, this film became part of a very particular wave of major studio releases navigating the complicated, uncertain landscape of the ongoing global pandemic, a period during which the entire film industry was actively renegotiating its relationship with traditional theatrical exhibition, audience comfort levels regarding indoor public gatherings, and the increasingly viable alternative of simultaneous or near-simultaneous streaming and home rental releases. The film's central narrative themes, focused specifically on a family feeling pulled apart by growing distance and disconnection, ultimately choosing to address this drift through intentional, forced togetherness during an extended road trip vacation, carry an interesting and perhaps unintentional resonance with the broader lived experience of countless real families throughout the pandemic era. Many households throughout this period experienced their own version of enforced togetherness, whether through extended lockdowns, remote work and remote schooling arrangements, or the widespread pandemic-era trend toward domestic road trip vacations as safer alternatives to air travel. A trend the film's own director has acknowledged, noticing with some surprise given that the movie's road trip concept had actually been developed well before the pandemic became a defining global concern. The franchise's continued cultural life. It is also worth situating the Addams Family too within the broader, ongoing trajectory of this franchise's continued cultural relevance in the years immediately following its release. Just 1 year after this animated sequel arrived in theaters, the Addams Family characters experienced yet another major cultural resurgence through an entirely different creative approach, a live-action streaming television series focused specifically on a teenage Wednesday Addams navigating life at a boarding school for outcasts and supernatural students. This particular adaptation became an enormous global cultural phenomenon, generating widespread social media engagement, particularly around a now famous dance sequence that inspired countless viral recreation videos across numerous social media platforms worldwide. This subsequent explosion of renewed cultural interest in these characters, arriving so soon after this animated sequel's own theatrical release, further demonstrates just how remarkably durable and consistently adaptable the Addams Family concept has proven to be across nearly 9 decades of continuously evolving media landscapes and shifting audience preferences. Very few fictional character concepts originally developed for a specific, narrow print publication format during the late 1930s have managed to successfully transition across so many completely different entertainment mediums, spanning single-panel print cartoons, black and white network television, major theatrical motion pictures across multiple distinct decades, fully animated feature films, and now premium streaming television content, all while consistently finding new, enthusiastic audiences at each successive stage of this long cultural journey. Why this family endures. Stepping back from all of these specific historical details and cultural touchpoints, it is worth considering more broadly why exactly this particular fictional family has managed to maintain such remarkable, sustained cultural relevance across such an unusually long span of American entertainment history. Part of the answer certainly lies in the fundamentally clever and endlessly adaptable comedic premise Charles Addams originally established all the way back in 1938, a premise built around genuine, sincere inversion rather than simple mockery or parody. The Addams Family has never functioned as a joke about strange, unlikable people. Rather, they represent a gentle, affectionate celebration of embracing your own authentic identity and values, regardless of how significantly those values might diverge from broader societal expectations and norms, all wrapped within a framework of deep, genuine familial love and loyalty that remains consistently present across every single adaptation of these characters throughout the decades. This underlying message, one ultimately centered on self-acceptance, unconditional family loyalty, and the quiet confidence of simply being unapologetically yourself regardless of external judgment, has proven remarkably resilient and adaptable across vastly different cultural moments throughout American history, from the conformity-focused post-war era in which these characters originally debuted, through the countercultural upheavals of the 1960s during which their first television adaptation found its audience, through the more ironic, self-aware sensibilities of 1990s American cinema, and now into our current contemporary cultural moment, one increasingly defined by growing openness toward diverse identities, non-traditional family structures, and a broader societal embrace of authentic individual expression over rigid conformity to narrow, traditional social expectations. The Addams Family, too, whatever its individual merits or shortcomings as a standalone piece of family entertainment, ultimately represents simply the most recent chapter within this remarkably long and culturally significant ongoing story, one that began with a single, unnamed cartoon illustration published in a New York literary magazine back in 1938, and has since grown into one of the most recognizable, beloved, and culturally enduring fictional family units in the entire history of American popular entertainment. Given this franchise's demonstrated ability to successfully reinvent itself again and again across nearly 9 full decades of continuously evolving media landscapes, it seems all but certain that we have not yet seen the final chapter of the Addams family's long and fascinating cultural journey.